Greetings, everyone. It's Maynard, Mike, and Brett with something that we have wanted to do for a long, long time, which is to talk to someone heavily involved in labor issues, labor opportunities, and everything that's going on in the country with labor. And we've hit the jackpot today. We've got Sean McGarvey. He's the president of North America's Building Trade Unions. So if it is being extracted, constructed, or deployed, Sean's members are involved with it. Sean, we are delighted to have you. You're joining us from Washington, D.C. This is obviously a really busy time for you, but we really appreciate you joining us and talking a little bit about this crazy energy world we're living in.
It's great to be with you, Maynard. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we're super excited. Mike and Brett, before we jump in with Sean, what would you tell us about the markets or what's on your minds otherwise?
Yeah, Maynard, greetings, I guess, from Orlando today. Not able to get back to Houston because of the storms, and I hope everyone there is doing well. In regards to the markets today, markets are down a little bit. Equity markets down a little bit. Commodity markets pulling back a little bit, but just kind of give you an idea of what we're thinking about here for the next 2, 3, or 4 days, or through the rest of the week. I think the market's going to be really focused on bonds this week. You have the CPI on Thursday, and you have the PPI on Friday, and so markets are going to move. Bond markets specifically are going to move, and most people right now are thinking that rates are probably not going to be cut this year because inflation is still a bit on the high side. But these two numbers at the end of the week, if they print cooler than expected, then I think people are going to start to think that the Fed might be in a position to lower rates this year. I don't know about that, but we're right now at 4.3% on the 10-year. If it comes in cooler than expected, my guess is the next move is going to be towards 4%. So that's probably good news for the equity markets. As far as the commodity markets, WTI today is around $82 a barrel. Over the last couple of weeks, it's rallied. Last week, we had a 12 million barrel draw on crude oil inventories, and that helped crude oil quite a bit. We're expecting another draw this week. We'll see how much we get. But the markets are pulling off a little bit on WTI just because the storms have passed and there wasn't much infrastructure damage. But the issue is now demand. As you know, millions of homes in Houston are out of power right now. So natural gas demand is going to be much lower this week. So we'll see how things play out there. But commodities a little bit weak today. As far as broader equity markets, I say this almost every week, it seems like for the last 20 weeks or so, is that markets are hitting all-time highs again. And so we'll just leave it at that. From an energy equity standpoint, we've talked about this for the last few weeks. Energies are really stuck in a rut. They're in a basically band. It's been this way for probably 8, 10, 12 weeks, simply because markets are concerned of global economics. What's going to happen? Are things slowing down? It looks like global economics are slowing down here. We have to see if the U.S. Slows down this week with the CPI and PPI. The one thing I would highlight from an energy markets this week is the Devon deal. Devon did a little deal up in the Bakken, and so the only thing, we won't comment on that deal. Only to say that we're going to see more of these type deals done in the future. I think these smaller companies are getting bigger. We're going to see consolidation, and so we expect this to continue in the weeks ahead. And so the last thing I'd probably want to go ahead and round it out with is that I think markets, be it crude oil markets or equity markets, are really going to be focused on what's going on with the presidential race in the U.S., right? You've seen all we can talk about this week is about the presidential race and who the candidate's going to be, et cetera, et cetera. Not only that, but just European markets, European politics. So I think, the commodity markets and equity markets in the second half of the year are really going to be driven what's going on with global politics and the global macro. And so we'll just go ahead and keep it there, Maynard, and hand it back to you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Mike. Brett, we first met Sean when we were talking nuclear. You're watching nuclear at Veriton. Anything you want to throw in the hat before we turn to our friend Sean?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about our conversation with Sean is that we met Sean at Vogtle for the first time when we were celebrating the start of commercial operations at the plant. And a lot of the conversation in the country since Vogtle, since before then, has been focused on a lot of things associated with large nuclear power plants. Constellation is talking about discussions about 3 Mile Island restarting, NextEra has had announcements and discussion around Duane Arnold potentially restarting in Iowa. And we're also seeing this weird kind of story going on around Talon Energy and the Susquehanna site around this dispute around Amazon's purchase of a data center, power for a data center there, and Constellation and AEP petitioning because they believe there would be negative ratepayer impacts. So the discussion in this country around the value of large nuclear power and the power coming from those sites has changed so drastically. Even thinking about it the days before Vogtle to the days after, even comparing it from years and years ago. So I think it's just an interesting and wild trend to be watching, Maynard, and I think it's something that we're going to have to keep paying attention more to. And I'm real interested to talk to Sean today and see what they think about large nuclear projects in the country.
Okay, great. Well, Sean, you've got a flavor for it up front. Again, we really do appreciate you joining, because I think as many issues as we feel like we've covered, we've talked to developing world environmentalists and European energy researchers and, all of these different flavors. We have been wanting to talk to someone who could speak from a labor perspective. So we're delighted to have you. And as I was mentioning to you, we're trying to find the smart people and then get out of the way, Sean, so that they can talk to our audience. Could I ask you up front, just so that people have a good understanding of it, the North American Building Trade Unions, could you just talk a little bit? You've been president since 2012. Talk a little bit about the organization, the membership, the size, the scope, and just anything you'd share just to get us going so people understand the scope of the organization.
Of course. So North American Building Trades Unions is an umbrella organization. It's made up of the 15 unions in the construction industry. It's been around since 1908. And it really concentrates on a few key aspects. We have mirrored local organizations in the state and local areas in the United States, and nationally. I have an office in Ottawa, and we have provincial organizations in Canada. So that makes up North America. We concentrate on national and international labor relations. From our national office, the local councils concentrate on the local relationships and labor management relationships with developers and contractors, etc. We work on legislation, regulatory issues here, a tremendous amount of training, and we have national committees. We have a women's committee, we have a health and safety committee, we have a training and apprenticeship committee, we have a capital strategies committee, etc. We have combined amongst our 15 affiliates 1,600 training centers in the United States. We we fund those training centers with in excess of $2 billion of our own money each year that our members defer from their pay into funding and operating our training centers. To give you an idea of scale and scope, if we were a K through 12 school district, we'd be the 5th largest school district in the United States. We have over 280,000 people in our apprenticeship programs right now. We make up 51% of the entire registered apprenticeship system in the United States, and 75% of the construction registered apprenticeship programs in the United States. If we were a state university system, we'd be the 3rd largest in the country after University of California and SUNY New York. 5 times the size of Ohio State. There's only one organization in the world that teaches more hard skill sets than we do, and that's the United States military. So training, workforce development is a huge focus of ours. Another huge focus of ours is disadvantaged communities and using our training infrastructure to move them to the middle class. We're talking about communities of color, particularly women, veterans, indigenous people, formerly incarcerated, where we run in excess of 225 pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship readiness programs across the United States as a feeder pipeline into our apprenticeship system, onto job sites, and on the ladder to the middle class, teaching skill sets that last a lifetime. There's a few other things that we do besides that, but that encompasses the main areas of our work, coordinating amongst the 15 unions on an agenda that maintains the economic standing of our existing members, and of course feeds into communities that we want to move to the middle class through our training infrastructure and their economic standards for them and their families for the next couple generations.
That's a tremendous lead in. I'm thinking there's some, those Ohio State people, how they are, Sean, probably some is going to write in and protest. But you'd also probably have a really good football team if you guys ever got it together. But let me ask you a serious question and all that. I think one of the things that's constantly coming up as we talk about energy and projects and onshoring, and is it labor? Where are we going to find all the labor, and in particular, where are we going to find all the skilled labor? This is just a big issue. As you look at the demographics of the American skilled labor workforce, what is your forecast, or how do you think about, are we going to have enough people to do all the jobs that we're talking about doing?
We think we will. We think we'll struggle from time to time. Now, I have to say that a lot of what people say about the lack of, or the projected lack of, skilled workforce when it comes to construction in the United States, single-family housing makes up 50% of the market. Okay. We do very little in single-family housing. We do commercial, light commercial, institutional, heavy industrial. So 50% of the market is single-family housing, and they are struggling quite a bit because after the last recession, migration of their workforce went home and did not come back. So they're having to work harder to recruit, pay more, and then train. We already have the infrastructure in place. Have had it in place for decades and decades. I said we have 286,000 people in our programs right now. We can ramp that up to 1 million. So we have confidence that we can do that. The issue for us is we deal with human capital. We don't manufacture widgets. So ours is an earn as you learn system. And in order to earn as you learn to come into a program, we have to have a job for it. And in the construction industry, every job is competitively bid. So not necessarily meaning it's going to be a union project. We certainly wouldn't need to hire an additional 50 electricians, 40 plumbers, 30 sheet metal workers, unless we get the project. And therein comes, the crux of a gap as we go forward. That's why it's really important, and we work really hard with developers, owners, clients, and we have national labor management relationships and boards with the pharmaceutical people, with the oil and gas people, with nuclear, with EI on the electric side. And we have relationships at the C-suite level where we can predict with much more certainty that as they're going to make capital investments, they're going to use us, and therefore we can start looking at manpower curves and start to do the recruitment and training to meet their needs when their projects go to the ground.
So this is great stuff. And I'll ask kind of a naive question. If I was the CEO of Company X, and I'm thinking about a big project, let's say on the Gulf Coast or some place like that we're seeing right now, if I put it out to bid, is it the case that I might get a non-union bid, and it might be less? Let's just say, I'm just trying to understand how this works, Sean, and then I get a union bid. And let's say it's a little more, but the union bid is going to come with, by the way, we will be going and training more people, right? Like the union bid is going to come with some benefits to the company that are not just the dollar price of the project. I'm just trying to understand how that conversation goes with those CEOs.
Well, it sometimes it doesn't necessarily come down to price. In many cases, we're actually cheaper than the non-union side because our wages are negotiated in a collective bargaining agreement where our members and our contractors agree, and those are the numbers that are used when they bid work. On the open shop side, let's just say you're a contractor that's self-performing. You have 250 people on your payroll. You successfully bid a project, and now you need an additional 250 people. You then have to recruit those 250 people. You have to negotiate individually with those 250 people. And as the work abundance around the area goes, so does the upward trend in wages. People are worth more, they're going to demand more, and you're going to have to pay more. Where if you were working with the union, who has a collective bargaining agreement set in stone what the wages and fringe package is, that's a set cost. You know what it is.
That's a really interesting dynamic that I'm sure a lot of people out there have thought of, but I honestly hadn't, which is if you're just building a project and you just want to price up what you need, then the union contract with the guaranteed price, as you said, could be the better option for you. Like, can I just ask one thing while we're also on it, which is, there's a lot of discussion in the world today, particularly in the US, about the value of a college degree. And increasingly, college is looking more expensive, and sometimes they're not learning the skills that are getting them the jobs they want to get. And meanwhile, there's all these great jobs available for people with skills. Are you noticing more young people choosing the route of, I want to go learn a trade, learn a skill, as opposed to college?
Well, let me put it to you this way. When you go through one of our apprenticeship programs, okay, you leave that apprenticeship program that they run from 3 to 5 years. You leave that apprenticeship program with your journey worker certification, right? That you have achieved the skill level in that particular craft. But you also leave with enough credits for an associate's degree. And we have agreements with Ivy Tech Community College and other community colleges. Some of our training centers are their own accredited community colleges. So you not only leave with your certification, you also have your associate's degree. All of our unions have some kind of articulation agreement with a 4-year university. Here at NABTU, we have with Rowan University, where we have a construction project management degree program where you can distance learn. We don't pay for that. Everything else in apprenticeship and that associate's degree is at no cost to you. But if you choose to go on and get your 4-year degree, you can do it through distance learning. The interesting thing about what's happened probably really over the last 20 years is the amount of people that are applying to our apprenticeship programs who already have a bachelor's degree. So they've already gone the college route. Whatever their chosen career was, they found that it didn't meet the economic expectations that they had. And they're applying to and going through an apprenticeship to meet the economic expectations they have for them and their family and the middle class living that they're looking for.
Wow. Well, maybe a unfair question, but kind of ask you to wade into it a little bit, which is, as you look at all the skills represented by your membership, where are and nuclear is maybe going to be an obvious one because we haven't done that in so long as a country, but where do we seem shortest? People and skills, and I guess therefore, and maybe where are we in better shape? Like, give us a sense of the tightness in the various trades. All
right. So when you finish our training programs and you become a journey person, you're armed with skill sets that it doesn't matter what the application is, right? It can be offshore wind. It can be a nuclear plant. Okay. It could be a commercial office building. The skill sets you have are transferable to any kind of construction. There's no unique portion of the craft. New technologies come out, and you can get refresher courses to get updated on new technologies. But you already have the skill sets that are transferable across any kind of facility or any kind of entity that's going to be built. But if I would say this, to answer your question directly, there was a shortage of welders 25 years ago. There tends to be a shortage of welders today. There'll probably tend to be a shortage of welders 25 years from today. Okay, so everybody's in demand, but when you look at the number of, let's say, electricians, the amount of data centers that we're building, the amount of AI facilities that we're building, the electrification, of the country that's happening, the demand on electricians, and they've had exponential growth. We've had exponential growth across the building trades over the last couple of years, since this new legislation that the Biden administration has passed. We currently have a down market, right, in commercial real estate. So a lot of our people that would have been working in big cities on commercial projects, are now working on car plants, EV battery plants, offshore wind, the new technologies that are taking over. When the commercial office market recovers, which it will, that's going to push demand even higher. But again, I would say, electricians, pipe fitter welders, iron workers, millwrights, sheet metal workers, across the board, we have demand everywhere. Laborers, you name it, and substantial growth across unions in the building trades.
And Sean, do you notice things geographically, like certain parts of the country, you need a lot more than other parts? Like what, or you're across North America, so anything you'd share?
It's quite honestly, that's our history, and that's where the term journey worker comes from. Because when there wasn't work where you were domiciled, you traveled for work, and you were journeyman, and you traveled to where the work was. That's not the case today. There's a consistent amount of construction just about everywhere, and in some places where we really haven't had it before, like Idaho. We've always been working at the Idaho National Lab for decades and decades. We built it. We've been there since the start of the race for the nuclear bomb. But now we're going to build a chips facility for Micron in Idaho. We're going to build a data center for Facebook in Idaho. Those two projects are going to require 10,000 people between the two of them with skill sets. So, there's a lot more elk in Idaho than there are people. So that's going to be one where it's a relatively new area that's going to have very high demand, where we're going to have to work cooperatively with the owner and with the contractors involved to get the right people locally into the system, and then also move people in to help with the actual construction. So I can't, for a long time over the last couple of years, the only place that I could point to the country where we weren't doing very well was Alaska. But now we've got the Willow project under construction in Alaska. We've got some missile operations in Alaska. We've got a lot of work in Alaska now. So everywhere we've got work.
I think as you were talking, I was kind of reminded, Sean, our bias, or our rough understanding of how unions thought about energy was you're probably naturally all of the above people, because union labor is working across all those projects, like whatever it is. It could be a pipeline, it could be a refinery, it could be a solar installation, whatever it is, labor is going to benefit. Is that the right way to think about? I don't know that the NABTU has an energy policy, but is all of the above? Tell us about that, how you think about this.
It is, and now we do think of it as all the above, because one of the problems that we had with the renewable industry, quite honestly, for the past couple of decades, through tax credit programs, through the federal government, there was no requirement on prevailing wages paid to the actual workforce. So we were given 30% tax credits, 25% tax credits to companies, to private equity firms, to build a wind farm or a solar park, sign a power purchase agreement with the utility, and then spin it off, take the 30% off the top and the investment tax credit. Meanwhile, the workforce was not highly compensated. Through the Biden administration and through the Congress, we now have, for the first time in our history, through the Inflation Reduction Act, we have prevailing wages in our tax code. The rule just came out about 3 weeks ago. It's an escalating scale. If you want to pay the prevailing wages, you get 5 times the tax credit, as opposed to if you don't want to pay the prevailing wage. So you can get up to 30% if you're paying prevailing wages and having apprenticeship utilization in that tax credit. Well, for the last 20 years, we didn't have that. And that's why we were resistant, quite honestly, and asking about where's the just transition for people who, as these technologies change and our energy sources change, there's this, the money's the same, but it's just being distributed differently. And I like to tell people, if you don't think that that's true, if you don't think that has real impact, we'll take a drive, spend 2 days and drive through Appalachia and see what happened when the coal industry went away and there was no place to transition to on parity with the economics. It devastated those communities. So we've been fighting for years and finally achieved in the Inflation Reduction Act prevailing wages and Davis-Bacon coverage apprenticeship utilization, which is now in the federal tax code. So now we have a horizontal transition. If we do a little bit more renewable and a little bit less gas and oil, the people that had lost their jobs in gas and oil are going to make the same wages and benefit structure in the renewable side than they were doing in gas and oil. That hasn't happened before. That's a recent phenomenon. That's a tremendous victory for workers in this country, particularly construction workers.
So this is a fascinating kind of element of the legislation, if you will, and we'll attach a link to some of this when we send this out, so that people can read about it themselves. Is that, I know that's part of the CHIPS Act, that shows up in a number of other places, does it not? Where there's stipulations on either what type of labor or how you pay them. Tell us some more about this.
Well, that's almost all of federal support for construction. Always had the Davis-Bacon Act requirements, which is prevailing wages, in it. In the 1990s, about 85% of construction procurement via the federal government, either direct building or support for projects, think grant programs and others for highways and bridges and schools, etc., always had these prevailing wage attachments via the legislation. We started the transition to these tax credits and these different financing vehicles back in the 90s. A lot of it having to do with, budget constraints and getting outside the 10-year budget window. And last time we studied it, which was about 3 years ago, it was about 55% through direct appropriations and 45% was coming through tax credit programs. Well, that 45% didn't have coverage for the actual workers that were doing the work. Again, commodity prices were the same, architectural fees were the same, engineering cost, legal fees, everything was the same except for the wages. The wages for the construction worker went down. Through these pieces of legislation, the CHIPS Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, we got the regular Davis-Bacon provisions as attached to those, which is traditionally done. It's through this Inflation Reduction Act with these tax credit programs for the first time in our history, where we've got them in the tax code now for that.
I see, because I've seen you in some of your public discussions talking about the Davis-Bacon Act now being, I forget how you put it, but more fully implemented. And so that's quite an interesting feature. Sean, there's so many ways we could go with this, but your membership, it's fascinating. The 3 million people or so that are under the umbrella. These are the working, living, making it happen, patriotic. I mean, these are grilling. I mean, I don't mean to typecast them, but I mean, these are just America's workforce, right? And you hear so much from them in terms of what they're concerned about, what they're excited about, what their costs are, just kind of what their political sentiments are. I mean, you hear everything, I would guess. I know it's a hard question, but what are you hearing from the membership right now in terms of what's on their mind? What are they anxious about? What do they feel good about? Like, what can you tell us? If you can, it could be a totally unfair question to summarize 3 million people.
Well, I can't summarize 3 million people, but our members, look like the country, right? Across the political spectrum. Folks in Wisconsin have different wants, needs, wishes, and desires in some cases than folks in Georgia, right? But the things that they're most concerned about, the number one issue always consistently, I've been doing this work for 30 years now, is the economic situation for them and their family. How are they able to keep a roof over their head? How are they able to give their family the middle class living that they felt like their family, their father and mother gave them? And I can tell you that a real low point, a devastating low point for us was, what was called the Great Recession of 2008, 9, 10, 11. We didn't call it a recession in the construction industry. It was a depression. We had areas of the country, we had states like Michigan where we had 50% unemployment. Our addiction rates shot through the roof. Our suicide rates shot through the roof. People were desperate when they were, you take a grown man or woman with three children and a spouse, and they lose everything and they wind up moving into their father's basement. That's how bad that economic situation. So with our members, it's always about the economics. It's about their job prospects, about how much money they're making, and how long the jobs are going to be around. That's always the number one issue.
Sean, thanks for joining us today. I really have two questions. The first question is, and you hit around the apprenticeships in the U.S. and stuff of that nature, but I don't think you hit on how do you market to these, people coming out of graduate school or either, out of high school. How do you market to them? How they get in contact with you? You talked about 1,600 centers in the U.S. training centers. Speak about that process.
Well, I'll speak about it, and I'll be quite frank. We're good at a lot of things. Marketing is not one of them. People don't realize what we have, what we've invested in. There was a long period of time where every kid that went to high school was pushed that they would not be a success unless they went into a 4-year university and got a degree and accrued all that debt. But we do fairs, right? We'll do live demonstrations where we'll invite, the juniors and seniors from a whole school district to a training center. We'll show them not just the craft at that training center, but the other crafts they'll bring in, their pop-ups and sometimes their equipment, and let them do some hands-on, put a welding shield on them, put a stick in their hand and let them experience what it is to see a spark come off and how a welder approaches a job or lay some brick, and all the different components. And it's gotten easier as technology's gone, because the kids today are not like me. They're used to smart devices and have working with computers. Well, our industry has evolved where it's a lot more interesting today for them, because they're transferring a lot of those skill sets that they learn, in the games that they play and what they use in school over into the construction industry. So we're trying to go where they're at, show them what's available, open our training centers up to the public. We participate in the School Counselors Association, so they meet every summer. We'll be there with all our trades. I don't know where it is this year, but it's a big show, and trying to explain to people, which people are really starting to come around, that you can make $150,000 a year and have no college debt. And you're looking at a guy that's extremely proud of his two daughters with their master's degrees. One's a clinical social worker therapist, and one's a special education teacher. And you can imagine what their education costs. And I could put them in any one of my trades and they'd get a raise instantly if they went into my trades. And they wish at this point in their lives they would have. Mom and dad were able to help them, but that isn't the case with everybody out there. So we try to go where they're at. We try to give them live hands-on. We have a particular focus on women and veterans. So we have a program called Helmets to Hard Hats. And then we have another program called Trades Futures. Okay. And that's the vehicles. They're 501c3s. They're the vehicles that we use specifically to target those communities and spread the word about the economic opportunity. And the other opportunity is once you learn these skill sets, you can go anywhere in this country. Pretty much go anywhere in this world if you wanted to. But, if you live in Washington, D.C. and Maryland right now, but you always really wanted to live in Southern California, and you become a journeyman glazer, journey worker glazer, you can move to Southern California You have the same skill sets. You go in, you make the same wages. You can go anywhere with those certificates. So we're not great at marketing. We're getting better, but people that are in the business of helping to steer youth and young adults into rewarding and economically rewarding careers are more and more embracing us, and that's a positive thing.
The second question is, you said early on that you're both a national, U.S. and an international labor relations. Maybe talk about the international component. How does that look right now? I mean, we saw like a lot of these farmer unions like rebel, over in Europe and stuff. Like, what are your relations in Europe look like right now? Is it similar to the U.S.? Is it different to the U.S.? Just give us a little flavor for that.
We don't have a lot of relations in Europe. Basically, I would say that through our capital strategies is how we broker our relationships with, in a lot of cases, with international firms. Now we have relationships like Toyota. We've built every manufacturing facility Toyota's built since it came to North America back in the 80s, right? So a very long relationship with Toyota. Then take a company like TSMC, who's building a chip fab in just outside of Phoenix, okay, from Taiwan. We have no relationship. We're trying to build a relationship with them. Sometimes we use our relationships with, we also have a national labor management relationship with the private equity guys, okay? So, we have $800 billion in pension money. So I like to say that, it's like the hair club for men, okay? We're not just a client, we're an owner. And when you're an owner, you demand to sit at the table, and we get to sit at these tables, have these discussions about how do we bring value? How do we bring value to what we do is provide the most highly skilled, most productive, safest craft workforce in the world, so that you get a project done on time, on budget, safely, and start pushing product out the other side where you actually make money on your capital investment. So we've built these relationships. I don't travel to Europe and knock on doors. When they come to America, in a lot of cases, the first thing they do is they get told by somebody to hire a law firm to keep the bad old wolf unions away from them. And that happens quite often, quite honestly, where they have a whole different set of social standards where they come from, and they think America is the wild, wild west, where they can do what they want, how they want, when they want, with who they want. So that's a constant struggle for us. But through relationship building with international companies, again, we're about bringing value. We're not the right choice every time, but our motto is no's okay with us. We don't like no, but if the answer is no, tell us how to get the yes, and we'll see if we can get there. Then put it on us, but don't just flat out tell us no, especially when you're not, an American domiciled company, and you're going to take advantage of, tax breaks and other things to entice you to build a manufacturing facility or some other kind of capital investment in the United States, where you're going to use my actual members' tax money to do it, but tell them they make too much money or they can't work on your project.
Sean, thanks again so much for joining us. And, I want to kind of go back to something you said earlier about sort of the value of the workforce and the experience base and their applicability to projects and everything. And, as I mentioned earlier, I had the first opportunity to meet you at Vogtle. A big talking point made at Vogtle during that celebration, and often pointed to recently in relation to Vogtle, was, hey, we did this one. We got to capitalize now. This is, we got to move forward. This workforce is here and ready to go and everything. And, I know there are some specific nuclear sort of related activity, whether there's nuclear, grade welding or concrete or things that are probably much more niche activities that, of course, may or may not be union jobs, all that sort of stuff. But help us peel a little bit of this onion to understand this a little bit more. Is this a ticking time bomb? Is it more so something that it's just, hey, this is more strike while the iron is hot, and everything, and it would just be a little bit harder later on and everything. How should we better understand where we need to move with the workforce that has just completed a large infrastructure project like Vogtle, and what it can do versus where where those workers may end up if there isn't a large infrastructure project?
Well, again, some of those folks will leave the industry if there's not work for them where they live. Some will travel to where the work is and take advantage of it. For instance, we're building, all across the South, automobile manufacturing plants and EV battery plants, right? So there's a tremendous amount of work. Then there's the data centers that are being built. The amount of data centers that are being built and the drag on our energy system just on data centers, according to the people we work with, currently it's 2% of all the power generated in the United States today is just to fire data centers. And by 2028, we'll be somewhere between 8 and 10% of all the power generated in the United States just to fire data centers and AI centers. Okay. So they're looking to locate those where they have ready access to, power. That's very attractive. And I can tell you, as somebody that worked with Exelon for the last dozen years or more, when we were shutting down, big mainframe nuclear power plants in the United States, now we're talking, as you said earlier in this conversation, now we're talking about restarting them. We're already working on the restart of Palisades up in Michigan. And I believe other ones are going to go. Even in California, we're talking about restarting a nuclear power plant. And the draw on the power that we need can't be met with just wind and solar alone, okay, or gas alone. It's going to take a tremendous amount of nuclear power. We had been talking about for years. I can go back to the I think the Obama administration, 2011, when they put out the first grant money for demonstration projects for small modular reactors, competitive program. I think 5 awards were made. Here we are, a dozen years later. We just broke ground for our first small modular reactor with TerraPower in Wyoming 2 weeks ago. But now people are talking about the big nuclear plants, the 1,200, 1,500 megawatt plants, the AP1000s. Everybody sat back and watched to see what was going to happen in Georgia. And I can tell you the transformation in information, skills, and lessons learned from Unit 3 to Unit 4 was incredible. And that time frame, the squeezing down of the amount of time it took to build Unit 3 as compared to Unit 4, because of lessons learned, is why everybody's talking about building an AP, or not everybody, but many are talking about building a new AP1000, because Southern Company proved you could do it. Now, we had our trials and tribulations along the way, but I think we're going to see a great combination between large nuclear infrastructure, small modular reactors, the other technologies that are evolving in the nuclear industry, and we're going to have it if we're going to maintain our place as the economic superpower in the world, in order to take advantage of and be the home of not only the chips manufacturing, but data, AI, everything else that's coming as, this revolution of technology happens in the United States. It all requires power. And we can train the people. We have the existing people. I'll give you an interesting statistic. There's probably only 5 or 6 electrical contractors in the country that carry 1,000 electricians on their payroll, year in, year out. Well, when you build a data center, in a lot of cases, you need 800 electricians. So you're a company that's got 1,000 electricians. You're going to put 800 of your people on one project. What about your other customers? Where do you get those 1,000 electricians that you need? I'll tell you where you get them. You get them from the IBEW, who've trained them and have a hiring hall system where they dispatch them. You need 100, you need 200, you need 500. They send you 500 people with the same skill sets, same qualifications. Maybe not always equal in productivity and attitude, but the basic skill sets that you need when you're making that capital investment. And right now, these folks are going so far as to start talking about financing for utilities, small modular reactors, or even financing, some of these bigger AP1000s. Okay, because they see long term, it's in their interest. The other thing we see is on the hydrogen side. Okay, we look at it like a car manufacturing facility where the assembly plant's in the middle. All the suppliers ring the assembly plant. You've got the guy that makes the fender over there, the girl's company that makes the seats over there. They're all fed in the assembly plant. Well, the same thing's going to happen with nuclear facilities. Every one of them's on a rail line, and every one of them's on water. So you have access to get material in and product out. And they're going to be able to sell direct power without putting it on the grid, direct to manufacturers at a reduction in power costs of like 75%. That's why, nuclear power plants, are worth their weight in gold now, because they're going to be able to do that, particularly on the hydrogen side, making jet fuel. There's one project, that started now out in Illinois. It's the first one. But power is the key. Power makes our economy go. Power grows our economy. Cheap, reliable energy for consumers keeps us competitive, and nuclear is going to be a huge, huge part of that, and is a huge part of it.
That was fascinating, Sean. You're making our job easy by going on these tours of things that thank goodness you hit them all, because we wouldn't have thought to ask you about them all. But you did just hit on one that comes up a lot. Power, of course, and power consumption, power demand, etc., comes up a lot. But one thing that comes up a little bit less is power cost, particularly at the retail level. And I was just curious, back to that question about your membership. Are you hearing from your membership about the cost of their power? And I guess that leads a little bit into inflation. But what do you see from the membership around their own? Because you mentioned it, the economic situation for their family is top of mind. Is power coming up in those kind of conversations?
It doesn't come up, and over the last 3 or 4 years, we have had the greatest success at the collective bargaining table when it comes to wage increases. Okay, for decades we lagged behind because the cost of healthcare is probably the biggest cost that we deal with, pharmaceutical drugs, for our members and their families, and we've had to put more and more of what would have been take-home pay in to maintain the levels of benefits on the healthcare side. So I hear more from my members about healthcare costs, certainly, than I do power costs. They understand it. They like their benefits. Their families like their benefits. They want to keep them. But the ever-increasing inflationary cost of healthcare is the real problem that we see.
Well, and I hate to jump around too much, but we're going to lose you here in a minute. So we got to make sure we spend these last 10 minutes wisely. Permitting. Permitting, it's kind of like power. It's one of these topics that, like, gosh, we just beat it to death. Everybody's talking about it. What's your perspective on speeding up permitting, getting more permitting done? Are we? I think we all know we need it, but do you think we're actually going to make some meaningful progress in that area?
I think we are. Our personal building trades perspective was, if we were going to pass a major piece of legislation in this Congress, that permitting reform probably would have been it. We're not going to make it. But even people who have used the existing permitting system successfully for decades to fight against projects or pipelines or things that they don't want, now are caught in the same trap, because what they've always wished for, they've now gotten, and they can't get it deployed because of a redundant permitting system, where it just takes too long, and the capital pulls out before you can build a wind farm or an offshore wind farm or a renewable facility. So we're fully supportive. Senator Sullivan on the Republican side, I worked with Rob Portman when he was chair, Claire McCaskill, when she was ranking member, they passed a piece of legislation. There's been some reform by the Biden administration. There needs to be more. We can protect the environment and expedite the permitting system, doing both at the same time. So that should be a real focus. We're focused on it. Some in Congress are, some in the administration. But in order to really capture where we need to be in the future, we need to handle that. It can be done.
Is there anything you would tell us about that debate that would help us all understand it? Like, what is sometimes it sounds like the problem is just there's anti-development people and there's pro-development people. Sometimes it sounds like people want to permit certain kinds of projects, but they don't want to permit other kinds of projects. So, more renewables might be fine, but we don't want oil and gas pipelines. I'm probably mischaracterizing it in both instances, but how do you understand what is the nature of the problem at this point?
Well, it's, you correctly described it, right? There are different camps here, right? There are camps here that don't want to see a hydrogen pipeline built. They don't want to see a gas or oil pipeline built. But they now have, through legislations that have been passed in the Congress, the types of technologies that they want to see built and deployed. And they're running into some of the same problems that they've caused for the people that wanted to build those other technologies. So now they're finding themselves that they're going to have to, come to the table, and they're going to have to give a little. And everybody's going to have to give a little, because in order, as we all know, the best deal that you can ever get is when everybody doesn't get everything they want. That means that you got a pretty good deal. So they're now finding themselves having to rethink. Look, you can go back 10 years and the resistance to nuclear in this country, right, has drastically changed.
Unbelievable.
Well, the same thing's going to happen because we have these technologies, but what good are they if you can't get them deployed? Because the same bag of tricks that were available to anti-development groups over the last 25 or 30 years are available to the other side to slow up and slow down the deployment of the technologies that they want deployed. So it's going to take some negotiation. It's going to take some leadership, and it's going to take some people to back up. We can do it. We can save the world from climate change, and we can grow this economy at the same time. It can be done. We proved it can be done, but people have to be reasonable. Right now, that's a little difficult for people to be reasonable, but I think we're getting there a little bit at a time. Well,
we are getting towards the end. I think I want to try to do the impossible, Sean, which is in our last 5+ minutes. There seems to be a presidential election going on, and it seems to be getting some attention. You're sitting right there in Washington, D.C. The NATO summit is happening. You obviously have a keen eye for political developments and sentiment and et cetera. Have you ever seen, in your years of being in Washington, D.C. and watching elections, have you ever seen kind of a show like the one we're getting now in so many respects?
No, quite honestly, and I don't see it as a show. I make no bones about it. I will tell you that I had a party on the 4th of July, and we did a shot, all the adults, and the shot was that maybe this will be our last 4th of July that we celebrate as a democracy. That this country, I believe, is teetering on the brink of a dictatorship. We've had some horrific Supreme Court rulings that nobody can understand, that are going to give ultimate power to the president, no matter who the president is. And it's only a matter of time until a president takes advantage of that newfound power that wasn't envisioned by the founders and does what he or she wants. And we've got a guy that's a former president that's been talking about what he's going to do for years now, and we know what he did, when he was president. And look, you're talking to a registered independent here. I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican. I'm a registered independent. But when it comes to what the people that I represent their interest in my politics. They tell me what to do. Okay, and their economic security is the most important thing. And we are still in the 4th year of the term of the greatest working families president we've had in the history of the country. including FDR. Nobody's done more to try to rebuild the middle class in the United States. This is our greatest opportunity since World War II to really enlarge the middle class through the smart investments that the government's been making, and the policies that have been coming out of this administration. So, I find nothing amusing about it at all. Quite honestly, I have 5 soon-to-be 6 grandchildren, and I'm very afraid that they're not going to have the same opportunities that I've had in this world if people make the wrong choice in November.
Well, you're so right to point out the seriousness of it. I think I always downplayed a little bit wading into it with somebody, just, because you never know what you're going to hit in terms of people's feelings on it. Question for you at a policy level. If we were to see, you mentioned all the things that have been done, right, from the Davis-Bacon to IRA, CHIPS Act, all these various things. What do you think happens to that body of work in a Trump administration? Or do you think there's enough support for it, kind of more broadly, that it might be?
I don't know. Look, I have good relationships. We're a bipartisan organization. Okay. If you were to look up hard dollar contributions by rank of total, okay, we'd be in the top 5 every cycle for the last 20 some years, okay, in contributions to Republicans. All right. So we're bipartisan. We're pragmatists. I just don't know that leaders in Congress have the intestinal fortitude to stand up to a president of their own party. As I've observed, okay, and as I've had my many private conversations and quite honestly arguments with senators that I know and congressmen that I know and a couple governors that I know, and I say, what happened to you? What happened to your backbone? You know this is wrong. We just had a discussion where you know this is wrong. Why won't you stand up for our country? If you won't stand up for your state, stand up for our country and call this stuff out. And so I'm not sure what happens. I'm not sure how much gets clawed back. I'm not sure how the ultimate power says, this is what I want, put this legislation on my desk and I'll sign it. Or if you don't sign it, I'll do it. I'll just do it the regulatory process. If you want to approve my appointees to the agencies, I'll just make them interim appointees, and I don't even have to deal with you. So I think that there's a lot at risk. We can't reset the hands of time. We can't stop technology. Okay, climate change is real. We can worry about birds on windmills. Okay. But we can't say that we don't need renewable power in order to stop the kind of escalation in our climate that we're dealing with.
I'm intrigued because you're so knowledgeable of the Washington system, but it sort of seems like one of the problems is, pick a party. The way you get ahead in the party is to do what the party wants. So you can be independent and patriotic and have your own views, but when you get to Washington, you kind of sort of have to align with management, so to speak, or you're not going to get ahead, or you're not going to be effective. Or is that a overly simplistic read of part of the problem? Or
no,
what do you think?
That's a real part of the problem, and the part of that goes back to how the districts are drawn. Okay, in our system across the states, you probably won't remember, or maybe you will, that when President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure bill was going on to the floor of the United States Congress, there were 6 Democrats that took a walk on that bill. Okay, so there were 6 Democrats that said, you know what, we're not happy about a few things in here, and we're not going to support this bill. And the margin was so tight that the bill wouldn't pass. Well, we delivered 13 Republican votes, okay, to put that bill over the top for the country, for the president. And the incoming fire that those 13 Republicans took because their leadership was telling them, you can't vote for this bill. You can't give this guy a win. Democrats do the same thing. Okay. Republicans are much more in lockstep. And there's a fear factor on the Republican side that just doesn't exist on the Democratic side. But yeah, it starts with the redistricting, and until districts are drawn appropriately, and there's fair and open competition, this is what we're going to deal with, because Democrats are always, a moderate Democrat is always worried about a challenge from their left, and a moderate Republican is always worried about a challenge from their right. So they fall in line, and that's not good for the country.
Well, Sean, this has been fascinating, and I'll plead guilty to trying to squeeze in such a big, complicated topic into the final piece of this. Can I ask you one more, though,
Sure.
which, as we wrap up, which is, it seems like this election, Trump-Biden 2.0, none of us knew what to expect. Most people didn't want to see this lineup, if you believe the polls. You have one part of the country which is very concerned about what Trump would do for all the reasons you listed. Now we have another part of the country that's concerned about Biden's ability to manage, right? You've been with the president a lot. He obviously has had a bad couple of weeks here, or at least one particular outing wasn't good. What do you think about the risk of Biden being president? How do you think about that risk? Because
honestly, last time I was with him was not quite 2 months ago. And he was the same Joe Biden that, I've known for 20 years plus years. My father's 85 years old. My father has all his faculties. The last time I spoke to Joe Biden had all his faculties. His memory on people's names and events and where he met them is, when it comes to that, he's a gifted politician, and Sean McGarvey certainly doesn't have those qualities. So yeah, he had a very bad night, terrible night. But what everybody forgets, was anybody listening to what the other guy had to say? They're so focused on Joe Biden that they didn't really pay attention to what the other guy had to say. But I'm actually going to be with the president tomorrow, and I'll be able to get my own up close and personal. But I believe he's up to the job, based on my experience. I believe that nobody's done more for working people in this country than Joe Biden has. I say the difference between Biden and FDR, we still enjoy the very important programs, Davis-Bacon included, that FDR signed into law. The difference was Joe Biden is just as comfortable being in a manufacturing cafeteria on a job site, sitting on a lunch upside down 5-gallon bucket, eating a ham sandwich, talking to the guys and girls. And FDR was a patrician. That just was not his world. He was doing business. So I'm hopeful that he gets past this, and that he goes on to victory in November. I don't think that it's any underestimation that, listen, let me just put it to you this way. I've been doing business with Donald Trump for 30 years. I worked on Trump properties. I worked for Havana Trump, okay, when they were building their casino in Atlantic City. So I've been pretty familiar with his modus operandi for a long, long time. And it did not change when he got to the White House. If anything, it's gotten worse. And it's certainly gotten worse after last election and everything that's happened since then. And what's happened to the Republican Party just blows my mind. For years, I used to watch stately senators stand on the floor and wax poetic and pull out a pocket constitution and wave it around and talk about it. Well, none of them carry pocket constitutions anymore. They don't seem to really care that much about the Constitution anymore. So this is a real problem we have in this country, and it's coming to a head in November, and God help us if it goes the wrong way.
Well, Sean, you're an important voice and an important part of all these things we're considering from a policy standpoint, and your mission to help the 3 million men and women who are doing all this great work. We all just completely support and identify with that mission. Having those people having great jobs and good standard of living, that's something we can all embrace. So God bless you for all of that work.
Thank you. It was a pleasure joining you, Maynard.
Sean, it's great to have you. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next week.